For 30 years, Johnny Carson was America's late-night confidant. His smooth timing, his quick wit, and that famous grin made viewers feel like they were sitting across from an old friend. But behind the desk, behind that charming smile, Carson kept secrets. He had what insiders called a mental blacklist, a list of Hollywood's most famous guests that he considered not just difficult, but truly rotten. And tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on those 9 names. Legends on camera, monsters backstage. Johnny Carson's secret blacklist. The 9 Golden Age guests he thought were actually evil. Carson's quiet test. Carson didn't judge stars by their fame, their ratings, or even their talent. He had one simple test. How did they treat the people who couldn't help them? The pages, the production assistants, the makeup artists, the crew. If you treated those people poorly, Carson saw through the act. He tolerated quirks, he tolerated ego, but cruelty, that was the line, and these 9 stars crossed it. Joan Crawford, the Ice Queen. On The Tonight Show couch in 1970, Joan Crawford was every inch the Hollywood legend. Elegant posture, immaculate makeup, that smile she'd perfected over decades. But staff who worked that night remember something else entirely. First came a 4-page memo about lighting angles, chair positions, even the exact studio temperature. 67 degrees, not 66, not 68. Then, hours before taping, she stormed in with her own makeup team, ignoring the award-winning artists already employed by the show. But the real story? A 20-year-old production assistant brought her the water she requested, and Crawford erupted. Witnesses say she unleashed a tirade so vicious that people froze in the hallway. She insulted the young woman, called her names I won't repeat here, and demanded she be fired. Carson's producer refused, but the tension lingered all night. When the red light came on, Crawford transformed instantly, every laugh rehearsed, every smile mechanical. One producer later said, "She was like a machine pretending to be a woman." Carson's own words were harsher. "I've interviewed corpses with more personality." And years later, when Mommy Dearest exposed Joan's alleged abuse of her children, Carson wasn't shocked. He simply nodded and said, "I believe every word." 2. Frank Sinatra, the charming bully. On screen, Frank Sinatra was the ultimate guest. Smooth stories, quick jokes, maybe even a song. Off screen, Carson loathed him, not because of his talent, but because of how Sinatra treated people when the cameras weren't rolling. He rolled in with entourages of tough-looking men who weren't showbiz types. They looked more like mob enforcers. Crew members described the atmosphere as like being under surveillance. The breaking point came one night when a floor manager gave Sinatra the standard 3-minute cue. Sinatra grabbed him by the tie, pulled him close, and growled, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I'm ready." The man, a war veteran, was shaken. Carson saw it on the monitor and nearly canceled the segment. Ratings kept it alive, but Johnny never forgot. Another time, Sinatra made a crude comment about a female staffer's looks. Carson snapped back, cold as ice. "We don't talk about my staff that way here." When the cameras came back, Carson was professional, but afterward, he gave a rare order. Sinatra, once a year, maximum. If Carson limited your appearances, you were on the blacklist in all but name. 3. Orson Welles, the genius who broke the rules. Orson Welles was larger than life. His booming voice, his legendary stories, audiences loved him. But Carson's staff, they dreaded him. Welles would cross out every pre-written question, dismissing them as pedestrian. Then he'd hijack the interview with endless monologues. One segment scheduled for 7 minutes dragged to 25. 2 guests were bumped entirely. And when Carson tried to signal that time was up, Welles ignored him. He even tried directing the cameramen from his seat. At one point, he stood up and told them which angle to use. Carson fumed. Genius doesn't excuse everything. He respected Welles's contributions to film, but he also saw the cautionary tale. What happens when talent is drowned by ego? 4. Bette Davis, the verbal assassin. Audiences adored her wit. Carson endured her wrath. Bette Davis had a reputation for interrupting fellow guests, especially younger women. Sometimes she would literally turn her back to them on the couch. Backstage, whiskey fueled her sharper edges. Staff remember sexist and racist remarks that shocked even by 1970s standards. One rehearsal turned ugly when she berated a cue card holder for being too slow, and that's when Carson, who usually avoided confrontation, stepped in quietly. He told her, "On this show, we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." She backed down, but Carson had made up his mind. After her final appearance, he told producers, "Life's too short to be flogged by Bette Davis." 5. Mickey Rooney, the troublemaker with wandering hands. Mickey Rooney was once the biggest child star in Hollywood. His visits to Carson's couch should have been nostalgic tributes. Instead, they were disasters. Staff recall Rooney grabbing young women's wrists, making suggestive comments, and ignoring professional boundaries. Many assistants asked not to be assigned to him at all. Worse, he often seemed intoxicated, slurred speech, rambling anecdotes. During one segment, he launched into a story about Judy Garland that turned inappropriate so quickly that Carson had to cut him off mid-sentence. Johnny was embarrassed enough to personally apologize to a young actress who shared the stage with Rooney. "That's not how professionals act on my show," he told her. After that, Rooney's appearances grew rare, and when he was booked, it was usually for pre-taped daytime slots where the damage could be controlled. 6. Zsa Zsa Gabor, the diva of demands. Some guests were headaches. Zsa Zsa was a migraine. Her requirements bordered on parody: dressing room at exactly 74 degrees, orchids only, no carnations, Perrier with precisely 3 ice cubes. She even flew in her own lighting technician at the show's expense, and she refused to appear with female guests under 40. When her demands weren't met, she'd stay locked in her dressing room, delaying taping and throwing the entire night into chaos. Once, she discovered the makeup department didn't have her preferred foundation. She shouted until Carson himself phoned her, smoothing things over just enough to get her on stage. After one especially bad night, Carson quipped, "I'd rather interview a cat." At least the cat wouldn't need 3 assistants and special lighting. 7. Shelley Winters, the powder keg. Shelley Winters was unpredictable, and that made her dangerous for live TV. She'd arrive on set, and instead of light-hearted stories, she'd launch into 5-minute speeches about corruption or the Vietnam War. Carson, master of conversation, could only sit back and wait for the storm to blow over. One director said, "It was like trying to steer a tornado." Her volatility wasn't just verbal. On another talk show, she famously threw a glass of whiskey in a fellow guest's face. The Tonight Show staff were so cautious, they'd quietly remove anything throwable from the set before her segments. Carson respected that Winters meant every word she said, but it didn't make the chaos any easier. Her bookings dwindled as the years went on. 8. Jane Russell Politics. That crossed the line. Carson didn't shy away from differing political views, but Jane Russell went further. Staff recalled her making disparaging remarks about LGBTQ employees, once refusing to let a gay makeup artist touch her face. She allegedly refused to share an episode with Rock Hudson, making ugly comments about his sexuality. During one appearance, she was overheard making dismissive remarks about civil rights legislation. That was the breaking point. Carson, who had close friends in the gay community, quietly banned her from the show. This was rare. Carson almost never banned stars of Russell's stature, but respect mattered more to him than ratings. 9. Jerry Lewis, the hateful comedian. Finally, the guest Carson despised most, Jerry Lewis. Lewis was adored by audiences for his slapstick comedy and his telethons for muscular dystrophy. But backstage, Carson and his crew saw a different man. He interrupted Johnny mid-question. He hijacked conversations. And in one notorious moment, he reached over and adjusted Carson's tie. For Johnny, who hated being touched without permission, it was a blatant power move. Lewis belittled crew members, refusing to use names, calling them camera guy or makeup girl. One cameraman coughed softly during rehearsal, and Lewis screamed until he was nearly removed from the set. Carson was disgusted. After Lewis's final Tonight Show appearance in the early 80s, Johnny's words were simple: never again. And years later, when Lewis's name came up at dinner, Carson stunned everyone by calling him truly hateful. Why Carson's list? Matters. Carson wasn't a gossip columnist. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was the most powerful man in television, and he had nothing to gain from smearing stars. What made his blacklist significant is that he rarely hated anyone. He was polite, professional, and wanted interviews to succeed. If he disliked you, it's because you made it impossible not to. And history proved him right. Crawford's alleged abuse exposed in Mommy Dearest, Sinatra's bullying temper, Rooney's inappropriate behavior. Each revelation matched what Carson had already witnessed firsthand. Carson's director summed it up best. The camera doesn't just add 10 pounds, it adds a layer of fiction. Johnny's real skill was seeing through that fiction to the truth underneath. The Tonight Show was built on laughter, charm, and connection. But Carson never forgot what he saw when the lights went down. Joan Crawford, Frank Sinatra, Orson Welles, Betty Davis, Mickey Rooney, Zaza Aziza Gabor, Shelley Winters, Jane Russell, Jerry Lewis. 9 names. 9 reminders that the glow of stardom often hides shadows. Carson's lesson still matters. Talent is impressive. Fame is fleeting. But kindness to the people with the least power. That's the only legacy that lasts. Thanks for watching this dive into Johnny Carson's most infamous blacklist. If you want more hidden Hollywood stories, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next expose about the sitcom that installed panic buttons, all because of one child star. Until then, remember, the cameras capture the show, but it's how you treat the crew that reveals the truth.